My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was putting the kids to bed. A text from my wife, Sarah. Working late at the office conference, it read. Don't wait up tonight. I stared at that message, my thumb hovering over the screen. A conference? She hadn't mentioned any conference. I opened our shared family calendar. Nothing. No conference. No late meeting. Nothing scheduled at all. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I typed back, hope you and Jake from accounting enjoy the presentation, and hit send. 20 minutes later, my wife's car came screeching into our driveway, and she burst through the front door with shaking hands and terror in her eyes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Let me back up and explain how we got here. I'm a 34-year-old guy, married to Sarah for 7 years, and we have 2 beautiful kids, Emma who's 5 and little Max who just turned 3. On paper, we had the perfect life. Nice house in the suburbs, stable jobs, family vacations every summer. I work in IT. She's a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm downtown. But somewhere around 3 months ago, things started to shift. Sarah started working late more often. She'd mentioned some big campaign coming up. Once a week became twice a week. Then 3 times. I didn't think much of it initially, but then I started noticing other things. Small things that, alone, meant nothing. But together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. One Saturday, she came out of the bedroom wearing new lingerie I'd never seen before. Black lace, expensive looking. When I asked when she got it, she waved it off casually, claiming she'd had it forever. But I do the laundry in our house, Reddit. I know every piece of clothing we own. Then there were the new perfumes. Sarah had worn the same vanilla scent for years. Suddenly, there were 3 new designer bottles on her dresser. She said her mom had given them to her for her birthday. Her birthday was 5 months ago, and the phone situation drove me insane. She'd always been casual about her phone before, leaving it on the counter, letting me grab it to check the time. But now, screen always down, notifications on silent. She'd take it to the bathroom with her. One night when she was in the shower, I tried to look at it. Her passcode had been changed. My stomach dropped. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Work stress. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me. But then my buddy Mark and I were grabbing beers after work one Thursday. We were talking about nothing in particular when he asked if Sarah had a twin sister. I laughed and said no. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. He told me he could have sworn he saw her at Rosario's last Wednesday, that Italian place downtown, having dinner with some guy. He'd almost gone over to say hi, but they looked deep in conversation. My blood went cold. Last Wednesday. I remembered it clearly because I'd had to leave work early to pick up Max from daycare when he got a fever. Sarah had texted me that afternoon saying she'd be working late, probably wouldn't be home until 9 or 10. The text was still on my phone. Rosario's isn't a business dinner place. That's a place you take someone when you want candlelight and wine. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to everything. New clothes appearing in her closet. More frequent gym visits. Her body looked amazing, but she'd never been that focused on fitness before. I started listening to her phone calls. When she'd step into the other room to take a call, I'd creep closer to the door. Most of it was work stuff or talking to her mom, but occasionally I'd hear her laugh in a way that felt different. Lighter. Younger. The way she used to laugh with me years ago. Then I heard the name. She was on the phone in our home office, door half closed. I was walking past when I heard her say Jake's name, telling him something was perfect and she'd see him then. My hand froze. Jake. I'd heard her mention that name before in passing. Jake from accounting this, Jake from accounting that. I'd assumed Jake was just another coworker. But the way she said his name just then, there was something familiar about it. Something comfortable. Which brings me back to that Tuesday night. The text about the conference that didn't exist. My hands were shaking as I typed out my response about Jake from accounting. Maybe I wanted to be wrong. Maybe I just wanted the truth, whatever it was. I pressed send. The message showed as delivered. Then read. I watched those 3 little dots appear, disappear, appear again. Then nothing. No response. I sat there on the edge of my kid's bed and I waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I just ruined my marriage over paranoid delusions. Maybe Jake was just a coworker and I'd just accused my wife of God knows what. Then I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into our driveway way too fast. Tires screeching slightly. It had been exactly 20 minutes since I sent that text. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly. I heard the car door slam. Then footsteps running up to the front door. Not walking. Running. The key scraped against the lock once, twice, like she couldn't get her hand steady enough to aim properly. Then the door burst open. Her voice echoed through the house, high-pitched and panicked, calling out for me. I walked out of the kids' room, gently closing the door behind me so they wouldn't wake up. She was standing in the hallway, still in her work clothes, her purse hanging off one shoulder. Her face was pale, completely drained of color. And her hands were shaking so badly that the keys were jingling like wind chimes. We stood there, maybe 15 feet apart, just staring at each other. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Opened it again. Her eyes were wide, almost frightened. She finally managed to tell me we needed to talk, her voice barely above a whisper. She said that whatever I was thinking right now, whatever I believed was happening, I needed to know something. She took a shaky breath, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't what I thought, she said. It was so much worse than that. We stood in that hallway for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving. Sarah's chest was heaving like she'd just run a marathon. I could see the panic in her eyes, but there was something else too. Something that looked almost like relief. She walked past me into the living room, her legs unsteady, and collapsed onto the couch. I followed, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. She put her face in her hands for a moment, then looked up at me. That's when she said something I never expected. There was no Jake from accounting. There never had been. She'd made up that name months ago, planted it in casual conversations, created an entire fictional coworker just to have a cover story. My mind was reeling. If she'd fabricated Jake, then what the hell had she been doing for the past 3 months? She stood up and walked to her purse, pulling out a manila folder I'd never seen before. Her hands were still trembling as she opened it on the coffee table. Medical documents, legal consultations, background check reports, and photographs. Lots of photographs. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I recognized one of the faces in the photos. Her brother, David. Sarah and I had always had a complicated relationship with David. He was charming, charismatic, the kind of guy who could talk his way into or out of anything. But I'd never fully trusted him. There was always something off about his stories, the way he'd show up with expensive things he couldn't possibly afford on his salary, the way he'd dodge questions about his job. Sarah knew I didn't like him much, which is why she rarely brought him up. But apparently, David had been very busy. Sarah's voice cracked as she started explaining. 3 months ago, a letter arrived from a bank we'd never done business with. A collections notice for a credit card that was severely past due. In my name. She'd opened it, thinking it was a mistake, but the details were all there. My social security number, my date of birth, even my mother's maiden name. Someone had opened a credit card account in my name and had racked up nearly $30,000 in charges. She'd called the bank immediately. That's when she discovered there wasn't just one fraudulent account. There were 4. Credit cards, personal loans, even a car lease. All in my name. All unpaid. All destroying our credit score. The total amount? Over $80,000. My stomach dropped. $80,000. We didn't have that kind of money. We were barely keeping up with our mortgage and the kids' daycare costs. Sarah told me she'd immediately suspected David. He'd asked her for my personal information 6 months earlier, claiming he needed it to add me as an emergency contact for some family insurance policy their mother was setting up. It had seemed innocent at the time, even thoughtful. But now it made perfect sense. She'd confronted him over the phone, and his reaction told her everything. He didn't deny it. Instead, he begged her not to tell me, promised he'd pay it all back, said he'd gotten in trouble with some bad people and needed the money to get out of a situation. He swore it was temporary. But Sarah knew better. She knew if we reported him to the police, he'd go to prison. He was her brother. But she also knew what this could do to our family. Our credit was destroyed. We could lose our house. I could even be held legally responsible for the debt. So she made a decision. She would handle it quietly. She hired a private investigator to track David's activities, to build a case, to figure out exactly how deep this went. That's who Jake really was. Jake Morrison, a PI she'd found through a legal consultation. She'd been meeting with him 2 to 3 times a week, feeding him information, going through financial records, trying to figure out how to protect our family without destroying hers. The dinners my buddy Mark had seen? Strategy sessions with Jake and a lawyer at Rosario's, trying to figure out our legal options. The new clothes and perfume? She'd been stress shopping, she admitted, a coping mechanism because the weight of carrying this secret was crushing her. The gym visits? The only place she could go to cry without me or the kids seeing her fall apart. But here's what made my blood run cold. She explained that she'd been planning to tell me everything this week. She had an appointment with the lawyer on Friday to discuss our next steps. She'd been working up the courage, trying to figure out how to explain that her brother had betrayed us, that our financial future was in jeopardy, that she'd been lying to me for months. But then I sent that text. That text with Jake's name. She'd never mentioned Jake's full name at home. She'd been so careful to only use his first name in her planted comments about accounting. So when I sent that message, her first thought wasn't that I'd caught her cheating. Her first thought was much darker. If I knew about Jake Morrison specifically, that meant I'd been investigating her too. Which meant I might have accessed her emails or her phone. Which meant I might have seen something that could put Jake in danger. Because David wasn't just a fraudster. The PI had discovered something worse. David was involved with people who didn't take kindly to investigations. Dangerous people. And if I'd somehow tipped David off that we were onto him, if I'd accidentally exposed Jake's real identity, then she'd just put the private investigator's life at risk. That's why she'd raced home. Not because she was caught, but because she thought I might have just made a terrible, dangerous mistake. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything crashing down on both of us. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw how exhausted she was. The dark circles under her eyes that I'd attributed to late nights with another man were actually from sleepless nights worrying about our future. The distant behavior I'd read as guilt was actually the burden of protecting me from a truth she knew would devastate me. And the worst part? I realized I'd been doing the exact same thing to her. I took a deep breath and knew I couldn't keep my own secret anymore. I told Sarah she needed to sit back down because I had a confession too. For the past month, I'd been investigating her as well. I'd hired my own private investigator. I'd been tracking her location through our phone plan. I'd even managed to access her email account 3 weeks ago by guessing her password recovery questions. The look on her face was pure shock. She asked how I could possibly know about Jake if I'd read her emails. I pulled out my own phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken. Messages between her and someone named Jake Morrison. But here's the thing that had convinced me she was having an affair. The messages were vague, carefully worded, almost coded. Talking about meetings, about keeping things quiet, about not telling me yet. Without context, they read exactly like affair messages. With context, they were obviously about the investigation. But I hadn't had that context. Sarah's shock turned to something else. Anger mixed with disbelief. She asked if I'd really thought that little of her. If 7 years of marriage meant so little that I'd jump straight to cheating instead of just asking her what was going on. And she was right. I'd let paranoia and fear override trust. I'd become someone who spied on his wife instead of talking to her. We'd both been carrying these massive secrets, both convinced we were protecting the other, both destroying the foundation of our marriage in the process. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We'd been so busy investigating each other that we'd created exactly the kind of distance and deception we were afraid of finding. I told her about seeing the new lingerie, the perfumes, the phone behavior, every tiny thing that had fed my suspicion. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. The lingerie was for our anniversary next month. She'd been planning a surprise romantic weekend. The phone secrecy was because she'd been coordinating with the PI and didn't want me accidentally seeing a notification. Then she asked the question that made everything real. She wanted to know what we were going to do about David. Not about us, not about our broken trust. About her brother who'd committed identity theft and was apparently involved with dangerous people. I told her what I thought she already knew. We had to go to the police. There was no other option. We couldn't pay back $80,000. We couldn't let him keep destroying our credit and our future. And we couldn't risk him doing this to someone else. Sarah nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. She knew I was right, but that didn't make it easier. David was still her brother. Their mother would be devastated. Family gatherings would never be the same. But our kids' future mattered more than keeping the peace. We spent the rest of that night going through everything. All her documents, all my surveillance notes, piecing together the complete picture. The next morning, we contacted Jake Morrison and Sarah's lawyer. By noon, we were sitting in a police station filing a report. David was arrested 3 days later. The investigation revealed he'd done this to 2 other people as well, including his own ex-girlfriend. The debts were eventually cleared from my name after we proved fraud, though it took nearly 8 months and more legal fees than I want to think about. But here's the real aftermath. Sarah and I started marriage counseling the week after David's arrest. We had to. The secrets, the lies, the lack of trust, it had nearly destroyed us. It's been 6 months now. We're still in therapy. We're still working on rebuilding what we broke. We created what we call our transparency pact. No secrets, no matter how small, no matter how much we think we're protecting the other person. It's hard, sometimes brutally hard, but it's working. We're learning to trust again. The crazy thing is, I never caught my wife cheating. Instead, we caught a criminal together. But the real question isn't whether we survived David's betrayal. It's whether our marriage survived our own. I'm still not sure, but we're trying. And sometimes, that's all you can do. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments. Drop a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.